All right, gang. Thanks for coming. My name is Jason Abrams. I appreciate it. We're in a small enough room where we can do question and answer. So I have the chat log open, and if you're in the room and have a question, you can just raise your hand, and I'll leave it to y'all to stop me and then answer. In the meantime, I will go through. We got a little person in the room, so I'm going to watch my language. Thank you for.
You're fine.
Okay, I'm going to do the best I can. Sometimes it just slips out. I'm getting better every day,
That's
though.
okay.
I'm going to give you all facts, and then I'm going to give you what I think are tactics to go with them. And the reason I'm doing it this way, I usually just talk. But the other day I got an email from someone who said, "Hey, I love your MREA podcast. I listen to it every single Monday, which by the way, we're up to like 70,000 listeners a month. So it's really going. So thank you if you're listening. I really appreciate it. And every month we unpack, or every week we unpack a mega agent model. But someone said to me, how do you know what models to use and when? And I thought that that was such a great question. And so here's the answer, I believe, is there are some models you use all the time, meaning there are some pieces of your business that are never going to change, some lead generation levers that are never going to change. Those should be the ones you like the most and the ones that are the most effective. But then the market will give you signals on where the next market is. And there's always a bull market happening. Even in a bad market, there's a good market somewhere. Evidenced by the fact that there's a lot of people that are going to have their greatest years ever this year and next. Even though we just sold less homes this year, we'll probably finish at like 3.7, which is a great number historically, but it's a terrible number if you look over the last 15 years, but someone's still crushing it. And so why? Well, I'm going to give you the facts that I think are driving the market. Here's number one. And you don't have to write it down, but just listen to me because you'll paraphrase for yourself. 48% of all US listings have been on the market for 60 days or longer. And 7 out of 10 listings have been on the market for more than 30 days. So what this means is, even though the average national days on market still feels low, in the vast majority of markets, it's increasing. And this always means the same thing. It means that the market of the moment in 25 is going to have canceled and expireds as being a part of it. There is just going to be more canceled and expired listings, whether you like it or not. And predominantly, this will happen first in the luxury space, and then it will happen in the rest of the market, which means that if you've wanted to like go take over the luxury market ever in your life, this is a great time to think about doing it. And so I interviewed a guy named Pete Ruiz. Pete's a genius. Pete's in Northern California. Average sales price is 3.2 million. And his number one source of business is canceled and expireds. So whenever I see like a luxury agent, I just assume they're rich and they know rich people. In Pete's case, he doesn't. He happens to be rich, by the way, but he gets all of his business from canceled and expired. And he said for canceled and expired, here's how it goes. Number one, price. Number two, preparation. And number three, presentation. In that order: price, preparation, presentation. And I won't wax poetically about price. Suffice to say, let's be clear. If it was priced right, everything sells. And so I said to him, I said, Pete, how do you get people to price their homes right? And he says, here's exactly what I say. And just listen and let it sink in. He says, to sell a home like this, it's going to take 15 to 20 showings before we get 1 to 2 second or third showings. And it's probably going to take 1 to 2 second or third showings before we get an offer. You might not love the offer, but that's going to be the math on how we get there. So here's the good news about being the seller. You're in complete control of how quickly we get that number of showings. You see, you're the seller, so you make all the decisions. You decide what we're going to price it at, which ultimately kind of decides how fast the showings happen. You decide which real estate you're going to hire to list the house. You decide how much you're going to pay in compensation because all commissions are negotiable. Really, the only thing I'm in charge of is making sure that your house is marketed the best way. Other than that, you're completely in charge. Now, stop the conversation. The reason that's such a powerful conversation is because as days on market increase, if you don't have this discussion with them, the seller thinks that you're the problem. The seller thinks that you're the person holding them back from getting on with their life. The reason the house isn't selling is because you're no good at this job. That's what they think, by the way. This puts them back in complete control. And so Pete always says the same thing. Anytime you want more showings, all you simply do is need to lower the price because the marketing plan is going to be spectacular no matter what the price is. I think that's genius. He then calls the seller every single Friday once he has the listing and simply says, I just wanted to go through this with you. I do it every week. Just to remind you, it's going to take 15 to 20 showings before we have 1 to 2 second and third showings, before we have at least one offer. You've had 4 showings. So just if you're wondering where we're at, that's where we're at. I think it's really smart. Okay, that's price. Then it's preparation. And here's what he told me about preparation. He said that he's amazed that real estate agents are still not using staging. And he says he thinks it's because they misunderstand what staging is. And by the way, we saw a stat that it's less than 35% use staging on every property. Here's what it is. Number one, exterior. You stage the exterior of the home first. And he said 90% of real estate agents skip it. Everybody sees the outside before they see the inside. So it's insane not to make the outside look better. That's crazy land. Number two, now the inside. When you're staging the inside, it breaks into 2 buckets. The first bucket is things I'm removing from the house. And removing can simply mean putting in a closet or putting in a basement. You got to take stuff out. I said, well, how do you think about that, Pete? He said, this is going to sound crazy, but you got to remove at least 30% of the things in the house. And I said, oh my gosh, that much? And he said, yes. And here's the order of the things you remove. Number 1, big pieces of furniture. Number 2, outdated looking furniture. Number 3, all personal effects. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And he said, well, your goal is number 1, make the rooms look bigger. Number 2, make the ceilings look higher. And number 3, make the home look less personalized. I thought that was really smart. I hadn't thought of it that way. He said that one of the key problems that real estate agents, the mistake that they make, is you could have a brand new house, but if you put old furniture in it, it dates the home, which means that bucket 2, which is I bring in new things, you want to bring in things that are wildly of the moment. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, styles come and go. The key is to bring in the stuff that's most in style now to offset the fact that most people bought their furniture 10, 15, 30 years ago. And so you need current pieces to offset the older pieces. I thought that was very, very smart. The last thing about Pete when it comes to staging for you mega agents in the room is at the end of every year, Pete would ask his accountant, how much do I owe in taxes? And then when his accountant would tell him, he'd say, great, so how much in business expenses do I need to own 0? And the accountant would tell him. And then Pete would go out and buy furniture up to that amount of money. Pete would buy all the floor samples, all the scratch and dent, everything they'd be willing to sell at wholesale prices. So Pete would make the government his partner, try to pay 0 in taxes, and own all the furniture for use for staging. He started that 7 years ago. Today, Pete has a 5,000 square foot warehouse and stages all of his own listings. I don't know how that math works for you, but for him, it works great because of his average sales price. But I had never thought about topping my expenses off with furniture. Thought it was very, very smart. All right. Then we did price, we did preparation. Now we have presentation. Presentation is how are you going to deliver this property to the marketplace in a way that sounds unique? And what Pete said is if you plan on putting the property on the MLS, then you should have an MLS strategy. And I said, well, what's an MLS strategy? And he said, well, when times are good, people put the listing on the MLS and hope for the best. And 9 times out of 10, that sells. But when markets change, you need to articulate to a seller why your strategy works. And I said, well, what is a strategy? And he says, it's 1 or 2 things that you're going to do for a seller that gives them an advantage in the marketplace that you can explain to them. And I said, okay, give me some examples. Since I met with Pete, I called a bunch of the top listing agents and I got their examples. I'm going to share them with you. You might not like them. I don't care. I don't like them. That's not the point. The point is, can you credibly sit with a seller and say, here's my strategy? And there's a lot of power in that. So the first one that I heard, I only do 8 photos. Even if there's room for 100, I only do 8. And while every other agent is putting 80 photos of your home, which pretty much means no one ever has to come look at it, I put the best 8 photos to try to get them to have just enough info to not have enough info. So they need to set a showing so that I can be there to help sell the property. That's a strategy. I'm not going to tell you what I think of that strategy, but that's a strategy. The next one I heard, when you Google an address now, it gives you all the aggregators that you can click to see more. And a lot of times buyers are Googling addresses. But there's a new trend where they're starting to put the first line of the comment section. And so my strategy is I have the best first line in the business. I am going to make sure that the first line of our comment section stops people from scrolling, grabs their attention, and gets them to click. That's my strategy. I'm not going to tell you what I think of that strategy, but it's a strategy. The next one, I go in and I change the order of the photos every 2 days. And the reason I do that is because there's a common phenomenon called house brain, which is what buyers that want to buy in any area get. And here's how house brain works. All they think about are houses. And so they have Zillow open in their computer 24 hours a day. And in between everything, they just click refresh to see if anything new came up on the market within their area. By the way, if you doubt me on this, it's proven that this is what people are doing. That's why they know before you do, even because you're the professional real estate agent. And that's okay. But here's the thing. They see a photo of the house and then they make a judgment about the home. Does everyone agree with that? That's why people judge a book by its cover. By the way, that's why books have covers. And that's great. But if you use and leave the same photo, they make the judgment once and they never have to think about it again. My strategy is changing the photos every 2 days that I hope I find something in the home that they give a second thought to. And that makes them click on it. And now I have another bite at the apple. Meaning they might hate the front. They may hate the kitchen, but they might love the backyard. You know the problem? If all you have is the front photo, they never see the backyard. I kind of like that strategy there. I said it. I think that's a strategy. I guess my point to you is I could keep going on more and more of these. I won't bore you. I just gave you 3. And I only did it to illustrate that if you're operating without a strategy, I think you're making a mistake. This is the moment you need to be able to articulate one to a seller, and I think sellers love it. So that's price, that's preparation, that's presentation. I asked Pete, I said, if you are in a TCPA friendly and compliant way reaching out to someone who expired, what do you say? And Pete says, I always say the same thing. All I say is, would you be interested in selling your home if I had the right buyer? And then he said, the seller usually says, if you had the right buyer, then why didn't you bring them already? And Pete says, oh, I love that, by the way, because you didn't pay me to find the right buyer. You didn't hire me to find you the right buyer, which is why I didn't. I'm asking the question, if I had the right buyer, would you be interested in selling? And they say, well, sure. And he says, then great. Are you willing to spend a half hour with me so that I can show you why I'm so good at finding them? I thought that was genius. I love the way he did it. And boom, he's off and he's setting up appointments. Okay, so if you believe that there's going to be more canceled than expired and that the average days on market is getting longer, which it is, then open houses really matter. That's switching gears. David Huffaker, I think, is an open house genius. He was in new construction for 9 years before he became a resale agent. And I said to him, how do you do an open house? He said, I am not going to tell you how many signs you should have because everyone already knows, a minimum of 15. I am not going to tell you how to market for it. I'm not going to bore you. What I will tell you is what I think agents do wrong, which is they have no idea what to do when someone enters the house. I had never really thought of it that way because when I did open houses, I'd bake some cookies and then I'd sit in front of their TV watching football and eat them. I loved open houses. I was one of the best at it. He has a whole different model for it. He meets them at the front door. Then he finds out why they are there that day. And I said, well, what do you actually mean? He said, I don't just let them in. I ask, why are you looking at houses today? And it's such a direct question. And they say, well, we're just looking. And he always says, are you really just looking? This is what you choose to do on your weekends? Do y'all just love architecture? Like he's gonna get to the real reason that they're looking before he lets them look. Then he walks them through the house. And I said, gosh, why do you do that? Don't you think people hate that? Like I hate that. Like that's like, isn't it creepo when you walk into a furniture store and then they all maul you and you know they just want to sell you furniture? I hate it. I'd rather just sit on the floor. And he's like, I get that, but I'm there for a very specific reason, which is to pick up buyers and sell my listing. And I said, great. So what do you do in every single room? Talk about the house? He says, no. In each room, he talks about a part of the buying process, which I thought was really unique. So he's going to talk about, walk them into a living room and say, so do you understand how the buying process works? And by the time they get done looking at the house, he has explained to them all the steps of the buying process. It's not long, it's 20 seconds per room. But he says that they get more out of walking through one of his listings than any other listing they've ever been to because they learn about the buying process. I thought that was really smart. He then gets them into the kitchen and he has a cork board. And this is literally a cork board. And on it, he has the MLS tickets with push pins for the other 5 or 6 homes that are similar that are on the market in the area. And here's what he says. You know, there are other homes that will make this one look better, or they might just be more your style. But they're for sale in the area. Do you want to meet here at 4:15 when this ends and I can quickly show you these? I don't know why that's so simple, but I know that it's genius because every 3 open houses, he sells a property. And I think it's just about the cork board. And do you want to meet back here at 4:15? I think it's really, really smart. So, okay, those were my ahas from those facts. And those were the models that I would use because of it. I'll give you the next fact. The next fact that I thought was really interesting is that baby boomers, those are people age 60 to 78. There's a lot we could say about the baby boomers. Like we could say things like they can't read menus in dark restaurants. Like we could get mean about it, but we're not going to because it turns out they have all the money. So we really got to be kind to them. So baby boomers who are 60 to 78 years old, they own 38% of all of America's homes. That's a giant number. Like there's never been another group to own that many houses in America. And when you consider that there's 88 million single family homes, now here you go, you're off and running. And so what are my ahas from that? If you're in a market that has old people, which you are, couple of ahas, and this is going to get depressing, but all people end the same. Without going into the science of it, you're going to be dead. And this is going to happen. And so here's the first thing we know about this group. You think they have a real estate agent? They don't. And the reason they don't is because their agents retired or died. I know how dark that sounds. But by the way, you want to be retired by 78. And so they need a new agent, just cause math. So if you believe that, then how do you go get them? Here's what I would do. Number 1, seller seminar. That's Sue Adler's model. She's a genius. She sells $350 million a year worth of real estate, all to people in this age group. The seller seminar is how she does it. Here's what it is. She meets for 1 hour, offering a free course on how to be the most educated seller in the marketplace. All it is pretty much is her listing presentation. She's going to go over price, she's going to go over preparation, and she's going to go over presentation. She's going to do exactly what Pete's doing when it comes to expireds, except she's doing it with people before they list their home. And you're thinking, why would anyone come to that? Not anyone. This specific age group comes to it. And here are the reasons why. Number 1, it's likely that they haven't bought or sold a home in 20 plus years, which means they really don't know the process and they want to learn it. Number 2, they might not have an agent anymore because of that whole age thing, cause math. Number 3, they might not be ready to have someone in their house because they're worried about security concerns or because the house looks like they've been living in it for 30 years. They know it's cluttered, they know it's a mess, and they know it's outdated, and there's some embarrassment that goes along with it. All of those things are the reasons they go to a seminar instead of just having you over. The last reason, they don't know you. How often do you invite strangers to your house? It's weird. And so this makes sense. So here's what the seminar is. It's 1 hour. She does it every 2 weeks, live, and then 2 weeks later via Zoom. When she does it live, she does it at the public library. She used to do it at a fancy steakhouse. She moved it to the library. And when I asked her why, she said because people assume that she is got the city's thumbs up and stamp of approval when you do it at a public library. I never would have guessed that. I never would have believed it. But knowing my mother, it's totally true because that age group actually used to go to libraries. It's because they're old and it's so good. It's so good, right? Does it at the library. And so again, it's this hour, and all you're doing is presenting a listing. I said to her, I said, well, how many people do you get? And she said, you're asking the wrong question. And I said, well, why do you say that? And she said, well, let me ask you this. If you go on one listing appointment today, is it a good day? I said, yeah. If I could go on a listing appointment day, it'd be a great day. She said, great. If you went on 3 in one day, I'd be like, that would be like my best day. Like if I could go on 3 listing appointments, I'd be like the happiest guy there is. She's like, super. So if you have one person in the room, that's one listing appointment. If you have 3, you went on 3. It's not about the number of people in the room. It's that you're talking to people who are going to be selling their houses. So stop thinking like a real estate agent and start thinking like a listing agent. And my head exploded all over my desk. I thought that was genius. If you can get one, because you go home with a seminar and get 2 people, you're going to think you're a failure. But if you went on 2 listing appointments, you'd think you're a mega agent. It's so smart. How do you market for it? She markets for it everywhere. She does social media. She does newspapers. It's on her bottom of her signature line of her email. Her business is holding seminars and then staying in touch with the people. Genius. I would do that. The next thing I would do if I was working with baby boomers is I would have a MOFR. And remember, that stands for make offer for immediate response. Most real estate agents, they make an offer for a delayed response. They send a postcard, a picture of them holding a lap dog. And it says something like, I'm great at this. Call me if you ever need me. I'm not knocking that. I love Yorkies too. It's just not as effective as an offer for immediate response. So an example of an offer for immediate response is get a cash offer on your house. That might not be your offer, but it's an offer. Stacy Esser in upstate New York has an offer. It's called Value Up. It's just the way that she thinks about the world and she markets it. So here's what her MOFR is. Have me come to your home and it'll be worth more when I leave than before I got there, whether you sell it or not. Invite me to your home and it'll be worth more when I leave than when I got there, whether you sell it or not. I think that's genius because when I asked her, like, what do you actually do? She does the same thing we all do for free. She walks through the house. She tells them what she would update. She tells them how she would declutter it. She tells them if they should actually put money into it. She does what we do. She just talks about real estate, but she gives good advice just like we do. She just markets it as the Value Up. The second thing she does that's genius is she made a list of all the vendors that someone in this age group might need. Furniture moving, junk removal, exterior cleanup, the grout cleaners, the reglazers for the bathtubs that are like green because they were bought in the 60s, all the things. So if you're in that age group, she has someone to do everything you could ever want, all the way from cleaning up the garage and sweeping it out to hanging pictures. Because you know what happens when you're 78, you don't want to get on a ladder. I get it. She makes it super easy. That's about Value Up. So she thinks of it like this. And this is how you should think of any business you ever start. What's the specific problem of the specific group of people I'm trying to work for? Because most real estate agents, they'll work for anybody. And so you run around and you're like, I find houses and I help you sell houses. That's not a specific problem. That's a general problem. The general problem, you got to live somewhere. A specific problem is like Tim Heil when he first started in the business. I only sell homes that failed to sell the first time. That's all he did for a living. I only sell homes that failed to sell the first time. And he had a prescription, a list of all the things he would do to get your home sold. Stacy Esser, the same way. And so, who's the specific group you're serving? If you're going to specifically serve people 60 to 78 years old, it's real easy to know what their problems are. And then finally, the last one I'll give you there, Will Van Winkler. Will is 23 years old. He is finishing his first full year in the business. He made $1.3 million this year, which I find aggravating also. So don't worry, we can just judge him. It's incredible. And Will is an introvert. He is not cool. I love him, by the way. I think he's really cool, but the general world wouldn't because he's an introverted guy. And I said to him, well, how do you lead generate if you're introverted? He said, that was the biggest challenge I had. And then I finally found it. And I said, what is it? Now I'm going to tell you what it is. And you're going to discount it and not take any action. It's okay. Because it's going to sound too simple. But I'm telling you, I'm not making up the news, I'm reporting it. Here's what he does. He sends out the golden letter. He sends out to the neighborhoods that have the highest turnover a simple letter. And the letter says, I have clients that might be interested in purchasing your home. If you have any interest in selling it off market, please call me, and then his phone number. That's all he does. For every 1,000 letters he sends, he gets 10 incoming phone calls. For every 10 incoming phone calls, he goes on 2 listing appointments. And he usually lists one or both of those homes. That's his entire model. There's nothing else that he does. If he does anything else, it's that he sends letters to people that own vacant land and says, do you have any interest in selling your land to one of my builders? Anyone that replies, he knows the 3 or 4 builders that would like to buy that land, and he calls them. He does another 60 deals a year doing that. All he does is send letters to people. That's it. And he makes $1.3 million a year. I think he's a genius. I think the letter writing campaign is genius. I said to him, what if you don't have a buyer? Do you ever feel bad sending that letter? And he said, that's why I joined Keller Williams. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Because we're all okay feeling badly? And he said, no, because if I don't, someone in my market center does. There's 400 people in the 5 Keller Williams offices around me. I know for sure when I send that letter, someone I know has a buyer. I'm great with it. I can't argue with that. I think Will's a genius, and he is well on his way. The next one I'll give you, sphere of influence, was the #1 reported source of business in 2023, meaning closed deals, and is on track to be the #1 source in 2024. So, you need me, sir?
Yep.
So that being the case, what's the takeaway? Well, #1, likability. People do business with people they like. And so breathe through this. If you're not doing enough business, you might just not be very likable. I don't know that I can help you with that, but it is something worth examining because it's possible that you're just not, in which case you better get on the letter sending campaign. You better do something that removes likability from it. Not everybody should run a sphere of influence based business. Here's how you know if you shouldn't. When you know that you're supposed to call the people in your database in a TCPA friendly and compliant way and say hello, if you'd rather do things like drink gasoline or drive off a bridge embankment or get dental work, then you shouldn't be running a sphere of influence business. And I would just like to assure you, the people that you're not calling that you think you should be probably don't like you very much. And that's okay. You know how I know? Because you usually get energy from talking to people that like you. And so when you see that you're supposed to call so-and-so and you don't, and it makes you feel like you just want to do anything else, it's because they actually don't like you and you probably don't like them. And so here's what I'm going to tell you people. Don't be offended. It's okay. You should start removing the people that you don't want to talk to from your database. That'd be the number one thing you could do for your life. It's not about how many people you have in your database that you're ignoring. No one cares. You know why? Because there ain't no paychecks in this job. So you having a big database and being broke doesn't matter to us. We want you to go sell houses and make money. So start by removing everyone you don't want to talk to. Here's how you do it. Pull up a list of all the people in your database and anybody that you're like, I don't want to talk to that person. Great. Take them out. And you're like, wait a second. Then I won't be in the 201 plus club anymore. Right. You'll be in the I might have a chance of getting paid club. Slightly different and a little more fun. Get rid of them. And if you don't want to get rid of them completely because you're like hanging on to this idea, great. Just move them to only getting some sort of email from you so you can stop feeling badly about missing your tasks. That'd be step one. Step two would be understanding the law of emotional proximity, which is simply put, when people make decisions, they do it with whoever's closest to them, either physically or emotionally. Period. This is why you people that are raising little kids, your biggest fear is that your kid hang out with a knucklehead. Because then when it comes time to make a decision, the knucklehead makes it and your kid goes along for the ride. That's the best example of it. And so if you're not in emotional proximity, you're not going to get the business from your database anyway. And so here then becomes the question, how do you get into emotional proximity? I'm going to tell you the answer. I got it from a guy named Scott Maloof. Scott's been in the business 9 years. He sold 500 homes last year. He's a genius. You may know him. He's the guy that wears the hats. You ever seen a guy walking around in a three-piece suit and awesome hats with a red brim underneath? They're great. Here's what I learned about the hats, by the way. On a side note, he actually has hair, which I found aggravating because I think hats should be reserved for those of us that are not on the path to having hair. But I digress. Here's what Scott does to stay in emotional proximity. He calls it 50 first dates. It's genius. Lunch, well, let's start with breakfast. Breakfast is someone who he's trying to build a relationship with. Lunch is a past client or someone from his database. Dinner is a VIP person, very important person from his database or a vendor that pays him money. And once a week, he has to go on all three. It's not like every day. Once a week, he has to have lunch with a past client, breakfast with someone who's trying to build a relationship with, and dinner with a VIP or vendor. And everyone on his team has to do the exact same thing. And when I said to him, sounds boring, he said, yeah, you don't get it. Here's the deal. You do this for 50 weeks, and at the end of the year, you've broken bread and eaten food with 150 people. And I said, well, so what? And he says, the human condition and emotional proximity is hardwired in. But if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, food and nourishment, then shelter. And so when you sit and you have food and nourishment with somebody, it moves them into closer emotional proximity with you, whether they realize it or not. That blew me away. Then he said, most teams are tracking contacts. How many contacts did you make? He said that's a stupid thing for him. His coaching sessions look like this. Who'd you have breakfast with? What'd you talk about? What'd they have to eat? What'd you learn? And you have such a deeper connection than if it's just a contact because people get to know each other over food. I thought that was brilliant also. He also said that it forces you to go deeper on your relationships because it's one thing to have you in my database. It's another thing to feel like I can invite you out for lunch. And I thought that was really, really smart. So smart that I tried it last week to see what would happen. I did it last week and I made every mistake you can make. Here's what happened to me. Number one, I ate way too fast. I'm a really fast eater, it turns out, but I never really paid attention until I realized that I'm done and this person is just starting. That was number one. Number two, I checked my phone the entire meal. And actually, I give credit to one of the women that I was with who said, I wish you'd put your phone away. If you were going to invite me to be here, I wish you'd be here. That was pretty incredible. Granted, I won't tell you who it was, but it was pretty incredible that person said that to me because someone else pretty close to me has been saying it and I haven't heard it. It turns out for 15 years. And then the third thing that I did wrong is I I didn't have a VIP SOI. I didn't even know who to pick. And it turns out, not knowing that I had to schedule a meal with them put everyone in my database pretty much at the same level. But they're not. In everyone's database, you have 10 or 15 people that refer you business and that need to be treated differently. This forced me to go pick my VIP SOI to invite him for dinner. Thought it was genius. And the last thing that I'll tell you, and then I'll open it up to questions or I'll let you go. Floyd Mayweather, he's a buddy of mine. He just bought 1,000 affordable units, apartment units in Upper Manhattan. He paid $402 million in cash. That's a big deal because that's the second largest apartment sale in New York this year. The first one was 641 million. Why does it matter? Here's why it matters. Less than 8% of residential real estate agents own at least one piece of investment real estate. That's shocking to me. And I want to just remind everybody, and I hope we have mega agents in the room because they need to hear this more than anybody. This industry, the opportunity of this industry has always been three things. Number one, I sell homes to make cash. Number two, I turn my sales career into a sales business. That doesn't necessarily mean team. It might just be that you hire 7 administrative people to make you the best version of yourself. It might mean you hire one to go do all the grocery shopping, wait in every line for you so you can spend more time making money and hanging out with your family. But it's I get my sales job and turn it into a sales business. And then the third, I use the cash that I make to buy stuff that goes up in value and throws off cash flow. That's called investment real estate. I interviewed a woman the other day, and very, very powerful human, unbelievable. And when I'm doing that podcast, I have all the answers. I do a lot of the pre-work. And so I knew how many homes she had sold the year before. It was like 800 and some odd. And so we get on the show and I said to her, hey, so just for fun, for our audience, how many homes did you sell last year? And she said, I don't track that. And I was like, okay, well, let's stop the tape then and we can find out what's really going on in your life. What do you mean you don't track that? And she said, I know a lot of people do. And I think it's adorable for you. And it was at that moment that I knew I was about to get punched square in the face. And she said, I think it's adorable for you. The truth is, I only track the number of properties that I own free and clear at the end of each year. So this year, I think it's 12. But I think it's so cute that you ask everyone how many homes they sold. And I felt like this big, and I had never thought of it that way. She went on to explain to me that this industry rewards how many units we've sold and how much gross volume, because those are the only things that we can track with complete transparency. But if you actually wanted your life to move forward, you'd be tracking things like what was your net profit? And you'd be tracking things like how much passive income did I make from real estate holdings? And you'd be tracking things like how much property do I own at the end of every year? And I was just enthralled with her. Incredibly powerful person. She reminded me of a great quote. On my second week here at KWRI, there was a brilliant woman. Her name is Ellen Curtis. And we were in a meeting and she was talking about something and I interrupted her, which I used to do all the time before I realized how shitty that is. And she said, she sat quietly. And then when I was done speaking, she said, don't worry, Jason. I will never let your confidence interrupt my expertise. And I hired her right after that meeting to be my personal coach because I needed her in my life. And I think it's the same thing here. If you're running around thinking about your units, I want to implore you. Yes, it's important. We sell homes to make cash, but I think you should be working backwards from how much money do you need to go invest in real estate and live your life. That should inform how many homes you're trying to sell, not the other way around. So the goal shouldn't be sell 15 homes this year. The goal should be buy 1 or 2 or 3 investment properties this year. And to do that, I need to sell 22 houses. That's how I would love everyone to think about it. That would lead to wealth. Okay, that's all I got, friends. I hope someone got something out of that. Any questions that y'all have?
I'd like to go.
Yeah, Amanda, go ahead.
I just love listening to you. You're just so informative and you're so like engaging with your personality. I really
Thank you.
appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. If you would, could you share with the audience ways they can like follow you in like
Oh,
other teachings or things you
yeah,
do,
yeah,
coach?
yeah. You should just, the best way to do it would be to listen to the MREA podcast. That comes out every single Monday, anywhere you get your podcasts. Every week we unpack a model and it's unpacked step by step. And then I take notes during it. And then every Thursday I email out all of my notes. So you never have to take notes because you're all going to be listening to it in the car. So you can listen to the MREA podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, everywhere else. If you want to get the notes every Thursday, you sign up at mreanotes.com. mreanotes.com.
And what time on Mondays do you
It
do
comes
that?
out before you're awake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's where you can get it. And then, you know, if you're more of a reader, you have the MREA playbooks, volume 1 and volume 2. I take my favorite 100 models every year and I bind them together in a book.
And how do we get access to those?
That's a great question. Joy, where do people get the MREA playbook?
Red Label.
At the Red Label store online. So just Google KW Red Label. The store will come up and you will see the playbook.
We do got some copies here tomorrow.
You bring one to me in Camelsville, Bobby.
Thanks, Amanda. Anybody else?
Yes, I've
Yes,
got
sir.
I've got a couple. What's a typical day for Jason Abrams look like?
Whatever Gary wants to do that day. Yeah, it's so crazy. You know, every year Gary asks himself 10 questions. And if you've never heard that episode of the podcast, I'd urge you to go back and listen to that one this time of year. He does it in December. It was called 10 Questions with Gary Keller. And he asks himself these 10 centering questions about his life. And one of them is, what's the thing that you really need to be in control of? Because absent of knowing that thing, you try to control everything. And I said to Gary, well, what is it for you? And he said, my time. And then that night I was thinking, it's so crazy because he's in complete control of my time also, which is how he's in control of his time. He literally, I think rich people buy poor people's time and then call us employees. I know that sounds terrible, but that's how I think about it in my head. So my average day, Gary runs a real structured morning. His afternoon is a catastrophe. Like he thinks if I win the morning, and morning is the 6 hours after whenever you wake up. So don't fall into what morning means. Morning means I'm awake. The next 6 hours matters. And he changed it because it used to be I wake up at blank time. We were hanging out with, I won't say the guy's name, but a really famous rock star who said, dude, my morning starts at 7 p.m. And Gary changed the definition. We've now trademarked win the morning, win the day. And it's literally the 6 hours after you wake up, whenever that is. You're perfect just the way you are. The morning is really structured. We write 4 days a week for 5 hours. So we sit in the writing room and we just write. If any of you have taken New Bold, we sat there and we wrote that. If you haven't taken it, give it a look. Then the afternoon, I got like hundreds of people in this org chart. And so a lot of it is meeting one-on-one and helping people think through their challenges. That's pretty it. And then, you know, for the most part, the last 10 or 15 minutes of every hour, I try to read. It's the only, if I try to read for more than 15 minutes at a time, I fall asleep. So if I can get 10 to 15 minutes at the end of every hour, I can tear through more content than most people will.
It looks like you need some more books behind you.
Yeah, you know what? We're running out of space. But what was your second question?
I was just curious. I'm big into sports as well, and I'm just curious at your most inspiring athlete, maybe that you've been around, or somebody that really struck you when you talked to them or were around them.
I get that a lot, man. And I've been I sold that business. It's now KW S&E. If anyone's involved in that with Jordan Stewart, it's great business. I guess I'd put it to you this way. Almost all of the clients that I had, and I represented 30% of the first round of the NFL draft in 16 and 17, right? Most of them had come from poverty. So like you'd hear these stories about coming from nothing and hitting it big. And so they all had incredible stories. The one that stands out the most now is Adewale Ogunleye. This was a guy who came over with his family from Nigeria, ends up in Long Island living in a home with 3 other families, is undersized his entire life and doesn't play football until his junior year of high school. Ends up going to Illinois University, becomes an all-star, and ends up on the Miami Dolphins by way of the Chicago Bears and becomes Drew Rosenhaus's first client. And they call him the golden boy because everything he touches turns to gold. I was in business deals with everything worked always because he had just an incredible discipline. And he's now head of sports and entertainment for one of the largest financial advisory firms in the world. And he'll keep going. So incredible guy.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for answering those.
Anybody else? Okay, we good?
Thank you, Jason.
Oh, yeah. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank
Hey,
you.
everybody,
Thank
have
you.
a really happy and healthy and safe Halloween, and thanks for being part of Keller Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome, Bobby.
That was
Yeah,
awesome.
Bob, you're Bobby.
See you guys.
Hey, Bobby was so nervous, by the way.